President Biden is delivering remarks on the pandemic tomorrow. He's planning to discuss the Omicron variant as COVID infection rates soar in parts of the nation. The strain has renewed fears about the health of the country and the U.S. economy. So for more on what to expect from his speech, let's bring in Ed O'Keefe. He is at the White House. Ed, good morning. What more can you tell us about what we'll hear from the president tomorrow?
Well, good to see you, Anne-Marie. Happy Monday. Remember that the president has already laid out sort of the winter attack plan on COVID when he emphasized that there would not be an emphasis on lockdowns or shutdowns, but instead trying to keep as much of the economy and the nation's education system open during a winter surge as possible. So it's expected that he'll expand on that and probably give some better sense of how the government can help local communities and Americans deal, especially with trying to find tests. I think if there's one big headline coming out of the weekend, certainly in the major metropolitan areas, it's the sudden lack of access to whether it's at-home tests or in-person testing at sites across the country or long lines for them. And that was probably partly driven by the fact that many were planning to travel starting this week for the holidays, so they were already in line. And then people on top of that who may be concerned they got Omicron or some other variant of the pandemic. But this will be a speech here at the White House in the afternoon. We're expected to learn more details of what could be coming in that later today.
All right, so now to the senator that is putting coal in Joe Biden's stocking this year, which would be appropriate because he's from West Virginia. Senator Manchin, he has clearly stated now publicly that he's not going to vote for the president's Build Back Better plan. What are we hearing from the White House?
Well, the president landed back here just a few minutes ago on Marine One from his weekend in Delaware. Took no questions. We tried trying to get his attention, but he walked from the South Lawn into the Oval Office. I don't know if we have the video of that yet, but so he's ignored our attempts so far this morning to get him to talk. What was most notable was the speed and the anger in a written statement yesterday from this White House regarding the senator's announcement, saying that it differs with the commitments that the senator had made to the president in person and in months of conversations about staying committed to the framework of the deal that would have cost about $1.7 trillion. The White House says that they're going to try to get the senator to change his mind again and get him back on board with this legislation. But it was a notably personal, sort of stinging rebuke of a member of their own party, somebody who's gotten an incredible amount of FaceTime or phone time with this president over the last several months, as the president was convinced he could convince the senator to get on board with this, and yesterday blindsiding them. We know that the senator, through aides, had reached out to the White House before his appearance yesterday morning to give them a heads up. Attempts to get to him did not work, and he went out and said what he said. And now we'll see. We've asked repeatedly whether the president has plans still to talk to Senator Manchin at some point this week. The president had said that that would happen late last week when he conceded that his legislation was not going to make it by Christmas, as Democrats had originally hoped. But as of now, it doesn't look as if there's any plan for them to talk. And if and when they do, it should be quite an interesting conversation.
It should be, because, last time we heard from the president on this, obviously, he was disappointed when he said, listen, this is not going to be done before Christmas. But you got the sense that Senator Manchin agreed sort of with the goals, let's put it this way, of the Build Back Better plan. But I guess you can agree with the goals, but if you don't want to spend any money on it, then it doesn't really matter. Joe Manchin said that the reason that he changed his position is because of inflation, which I suppose is reasonable, and the impact that the plan could have on the economy. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki does not agree with that. What's she saying about this?
Well, as we said, she has already issued that statement. She will speak out again later this afternoon in her daily briefing, and we'll see if she's equally, direct in the White House, in conveying the White House's current sentiments. But you make a good point there. It's not that he doesn't support the issues that are being talked about in that legislation. It's that he no longer supports the legislation as currently written, a roughly $1.7 trillion framework that would do a host of things regarding child care, elder care, universal pre-kindergarten, combating climate change with more than $500 billion of federal funding. Manchin's issue was that some aspects of this legislation, the most popular parts, are going to end up costing taxpayers a certain amount of money over 10 years. the legislation is written, will only authorize them for a handful of years. And what Manchin was essentially saying to fellow Democrats is, you know that we're going to try to get a lot of this reauthorized in the next few years. So why not just do it for a longer period of time and show people the true cost of what those things would cost? But don't raise the price beyond $1.7 trillion. So if you're going to do that, you're going to have to take some things out of the legislation to extend a handful of them for those 10 years and still keep it at $1.7 trillion. He signaled he had concerns, for example, also with some of the climate change provisions in there. As you pointed out, he's from a coal-producing state, one of the few places in the world that still benefits economically from older versions of fossil fuel energy sources, and he's still concerned about what that could mean for the economy of his state. This White House, other Democrats turn around and say, there are provisions in here that would ultimately help the economy. There are provisions in here that would help workers in West Virginia. A lot of those renewable energy sources or the changes that we're making would benefit West Virginia workers ultimately, but Biden's not biting, or Manchin's not biting. So we will see in the new year whether or not this happens again, whether the debate continues. Notably this morning, the Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says that they will consider the Build Back Better legislation as written at some point early in the new year, saying he wants all senators to weigh in on the Senate floor, not just on television, which is a way of saying, you know, you can say what you want to say over the airwaves, but let's see you actually cast a vote against things like fighting climate change, boosting child care aid, expanding universal pre-kindergarten, expanding Medicare, programs that on their own are quite popular back home and can be used against a politician in the court of public opinion.
So that sort of tactic by Chuck Schumer is not about forcing Joe Manchin or any other senator's hand per se, but about sort of getting them on the record so they have to own the decision publicly?
Yep. And look, that is an impression
of that
are to be determined. Manchin isn't up for re-election if he wants to run again until 2024. But it's an argument that many Democrats have been making throughout the year, not only on Build Back Better, but on voting rights and all these other issues. Hold a vote. Let the record reflect that whatever senator, for whatever reason, voted against these things so that we can use that against them, or that voters back home can at least see that they have been rejecting these ideas that on their own can be pretty popular with a vast majority of Americans. And so while Republicans may be willing to vote against this large piece of legislation as written, as compiled together, would they vote against all of these individual issues if they were on the floor? Maybe they'd vote differently. And so either way, this would fulfill a pledge by Schumer to hold a vote, and it would put Manchin on the record as well as those other Republicans. And we'll see. But note that in his statement, because you got to parse these things, and I know you're great, and you always read up on this stuff, Anne-Marie, and you know, he says in this letter, we will consider the legislation in early January. He didn't say they're going to hold a vote. He said they're going to consider it, which means they will bring it up for a debate. Whether that compels Manchin and fellow Democrats to then copy-paste a new, maybe smaller, more modest version of the proposal into that legislative text and pass it and send it back to the House remains to be seen. And whether that would pass the House after making all these changes also remains to be seen. So we could be right back where we were come the new year with this ongoing debate and the war of words and beliefs inside the Democratic Party. And for anyone scratching their head, confused or concerned and upset about this at home, let it be a reminder. Elections have consequences. And if you want your side to prevail, you got to be putting as many people in positions of power as possible in states all across the country in order to get your way. And that's a message that Senator Manchin has delivered. Former President Obama has delivered it as well. That if Democrats want to get things done, they got to elect more Democrats all across the country and be able to accept the fact that being a Democrat in one part of the country means a little different in another part of the country. And you got to find ways to find common ground. But for a White House that has sold itself as an effective congressional negotiator to be struggling in such a high-profile way with members of its own party, watch in the next few weeks to see how polling reflects this and whether yet again this president's argument for election is put into question as he's clearly suffered so far in getting members of his party on board. But this White House will say, they'll probably say it again later today, it ain't over till it's over. And there's still a possibility that many of these issues can be put into law and passed.
Well, it sounds like January 2022 will be almost as exciting as January 2021. Hopefully not, actually. That was a rough January. Ed, thank you very much and happy holidays.
Take care.